Piero, can we continue with your views?
Of course, thanks very much. I'm going to answer your question based on my experience with Mesas Ejecutivas. It's a tool for industrial policy we signed and implemented when I was Minister of Production of Peru. We wanted to encourage productive diversification. We were faced with two main problems. The first is the aversion against industrial policies in Latin America because of the bad experiences in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. No? Indeed, industrial policy has such a bad name that we don't even dare to call them industrial policy. We call them productive development policies, but of course they're the same thing. No? The second is a dearth of actual instruments to implement the industrial policy. So we had to start pretty much from scratch. So to promote productive diversification, we tried to identify and remove the main bottlenecks that were withholding productivity, employment, investment in sectors. We started with sectors. I will go back there in a second. But instead of hiring a consultancy firm to write, about extensive diagnosis, a report about all the problems those sectors were facing, we started convening the main stakeholders at the national level of the sectors or value chains, no? And we started a process of cooperation, collaboration, trying to identify and solve the problems, no? And that's how we created the instrument called Mesas Ejecutivas. Of course, we need to solve multiple coordination failures. First, between a compartmentalized government at different levels, coordination failures also between the private sector and the public sector, and within the private sector. And many of these problems, of course, are very context specific. Again, we started at national level, but over time, it was clear that many of the problems were specific to the regions and to from the beginning, we emphasized execution. That's the reason why, hence its name, Ejecutivas. For a number of reasons. First, political times are very short, right? So we had to start from the beginning. Second, we knew a lot had to be learned during implementation, during execution. So instead of spending a year or two, right, trying to write a report, we started executing. We started with 3 or 4 problems with each mesa, and then establish learning cycles to make corrections based on what we learned, on experience, right? We were sensitive to avoid the mistakes of the past. First, we didn't want to solely based on industry. We knew that now there are probabilities of possibility of acquiring capabilities beyond industry, right? Modern agriculture and aquaculture, forestry, etc., is a clear sector where there's a lot of capability building possible, but it's not limited to that. The second, we wanted to avoid the mistakes that Latin American countries made, which was basically to provide tax exemptions, subsidies to compensate for lack of productivity. What we wanted to do, we wanted to make the sectors better. So we wanted to provide the public goods and services to help the sectors. And beyond everything, we wanted to really solve these coordination failures that were making the sectors less productive, right? And third, we wanted to do something that was consistent with our limited government capabilities. We could not start, we're not Singapore. We could not start with a big bang approach. So we started small and built based on that, right? The mesas are neither top down nor bottom up, no? It includes actors on the ground that know their problems. Many times they don't know their solutions, but they know their problems. And when the problems cannot be solved at a more local level, we bump up to high-level authorities that have convening capabilities. They can allocate budget. They can resolve. They have a capability to resolve conflicts, etc. No, we did not start with a blueprint about Mesas Ejecutivas we had to carry out. Actually, we only started with some ideas on public management, and Mesas is what it worked in practice. No. Over the past years, and mesas have survived since I left government, mesas have solved problems, but also have learned to solve problems. And that's very important. It has generated significant capabilities in the public sector, in the private sector, and above all, has generated the capability to coordinate. No? And as I mentioned earlier, we started mesas at national level and have become increasingly regional. At this point, nobody really questions the need to do this sort of productive development policies, modern industrial policies, etc. in Peru, and I would say in the region. Based on the Peruvian experience, last week, Chile, the Chilean government has launched mesas ejecutivas trying to address some of these issues as well, right? Moving beyond purely horizontal problems. My last point, perhaps the most critical lesson for me is that a weak government from a middle income country that is very politically unstable, we had 6 presidents in 6 years, no, can quickly adjust norms, regulations, generate institutions, and responding to changing conditions, right? In other words, we can do what people think governments can actually do. So that's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Piero. Hamaguchi, now what?